There are over 16,000 children in foster care in New York City. CFR works on behalf of many of their families.
We get asked all the time, how do you work with parents who are accused of mistreating their children? And part of the answer is that there's a misapprehension out there that just because you're investigated for maltreatment, that there was something you've done that really makes you a monster. And I think that's because the media often talks about the really awful stories. But the really awful stories are a small minority of what happens in the child welfare system to our parents. Most families who are caught up in the child welfare system have problems which are no different than ours. Depression, illness, and maybe an abusive partner. But the families that CFR serves have additionally the sets of issues that come out of living in poverty. And so they lack the resources that people with means have. But if it were somebody with means, no one would think that the solution to these problems is to take away their children.
Hua Ding's son Jimmy was in the hospital undergoing treatment for stage 3 neuroblastoma when a routine X-ray revealed rib fractures. The Administration for Children's Services, or ACS, was called. Hua Ding, who speaks no English, was interviewed by ACS, however, not in her native dialect.
Hua Ding is a parent who was already struggling with one of the worst crises a parent could imagine. Her young son is battling cancer. They've already been to China and then back again, trying to find him the best possible care. And he spent most of his young life in a hospital.
ACS becomes involved in their lives on August 20th and basically accuses them of abusing this child that they have gone to the end of the world for, and hands them a petition to go into court on September 2nd, again only in English, and does not really explain to them anything about the procedure or the process that they are now involved in. And they walk into the courtroom on September 2nd, and their child that they have done so much for in his short life is removed from their care.
So
the first thing that the CFR team did that was different was speak to Hua Ding in her dialect. So simple. The second thing the team did was an investigation that went beyond the injury and beyond speaking to the doctors. They really tried to figure out who is this family and how did they behave. They even talked to parents who were on the cancer ward with Jimmy when he was in the hospital. I still remember the Friday night when the attorney on the team called me really late, and she had been in the office all evening speaking to people at the hospital, and she said, "Michelle, one of the people at the hospital said, do whatever you have to do to get this little boy back to his mother."
You saw this mother was really, really involved in her child, in his health. It was more of, nothing is gonna get in my way to make sure I can protect my child. And, I know that I did nothing wrong.
Our lawyer got a court order that permitted Hua Ding to be with Jimmy in the hospital during the day only when hospital staff said, "This little boy is hoarse from crying all night for his mother." Did the city finally agree that she could be there round the clock with him?
The doctor that was consulted from the Child Protective Team had never met Jimmy, had never met his parents, had never worked on this case or seen any of the medical records prior to being consulted. However, it was that doctor that ACS relied on. It was that doctor that was quoted in the petition that was filed on September 2nd, and it was that doctor that was ACS's primary witness at the 1028 hearing, where they argued that the child should not be returned to the parents.
Out of 270 days that Jimmy was in the hospital, he was actually only home for 9 days, and they weren't consecutive days. Yet the fractures show up during a period where he's actually in the hospital. Now, experts on both sides of the case testified that it was actually impossible to pinpoint when these fractures occurred, but Hua Ding explained to the city that there had been a time when he was trying Jimmy to walk down the hall with his IV pole, and he fell, and the pole fell on top of him. And a nurse corroborated that. And even in spite of all of those things, the city still insisted that it had to have been the parents who injured Jimmy.
The judge agreed with our argument that how can the unexplained, when a child is in the hospital for that many days and under the care of that many professionals, and poor nutrition and 6 cycles of chemotherapy and a huge mass resection where they went in through the child's 7th and 8th ribs on the left side, which were the same ribs involved in the rib fractures, and after radiation, how can, and testimony that the bones were thereby weakened by all of these procedures, how can ACS look to the parents to explain the unexplained? Perhaps you should be looking at the medical professionals to explain this. We really made a difference in this family's life, and the real difference that we made was really adding some volume to the parents' voice. When we work with them and when we use our model and when we have an attorney who can advocate in the courtroom and a social worker like Maggie who can advocate in the community, suddenly our clients' voices are heard.
Families often find themselves accused, mistrusted, and then become alienated by the process. And they're expected to prove that they love their children. Meanwhile, their children are in foster care at huge financial cost to the taxpayer and unbelievable emotional cost to the family and the child.
In New York State, the average length of time a child stays in foster care is nearly 3 years. It costs the government $24,000 minimum per child per year spent in foster care. For CFR clients, the average length of stay in foster care is reduced to 4 months. CFR's costs are $6,000 per family, regardless of how many children are involved. In 1 year alone, CFR saved taxpayers $2.2 million in foster care costs.
At the beginning of a case, like the city, we don't always know what had happened. The city has a very difficult job of making quick decisions in complex situations. But even on the best day, our advocacy promotes better decisions by both the court and the child welfare system. We fight hard for our clients' legal rights. We think every family deserves that.
CFR, every family matters.